Hello, wonderful people. I just want to say that it's a great honor to have John Paul today with us discussing the topic of loneliness. Before we start to dissect the picture and dive deep into this, I just want to invite you, John Paul, with your experience as a therapist, your contribution to the Marmalade Trust, who does a lot of great work around loneliness. Let's discuss first what is loneliness before we look at why this matters, how it can impact men, and so on.
Loneliness, I would say, is a state of disconnection. What largely we want is to feel connected to other people and to our environment, to pets. It's not just other people we need to feel connected to, also to ourselves, of course. And I think loneliness is a state of disconnection that people experience for various reasons. I mean, we'll probably get into what those reasons are, but actually, I think for most human beings, our biology, our physiology, things like fear, anger, the competing, comparisons, needing to win, better than, less than, they're all disconnecting from other people. And they're both of those parts, the sort of survival part and also the drives, they are very dominant psychologically for human beings. And unfortunately for us, because our state of happiness, our well-being, is largely down to how connected we feel to our environment, to ourselves, to people around us. Unfortunately, there's a lot of our biology, as I say, and a lot of things that happen in the world and things we get frightened and angry about that disconnect us. Whether people are more lonely than they were, possibly, because I think people might get more fearful and angry than they used to be because of the volume of frightening and annoying things that we might see through media and social media, also the comparisons and competition that come through media and social media. So yes, I mean, that was quite a long way of saying I think it's a state of disconnection for human beings, and therefore the way through it, which I guess we'll talk about, is to manage those parts that disconnect us and to bring more into life those things that connect and things that we can connect to, and whatever that looks like for someone.
Lovely. And I just want to say, I like how you mentioned the idea of like it's a sense of disconnect or element of this connection, because I'm thinking when we connected, and what I like to, it's picked up from, mainstream media, but loneliness is a bit like hunger, is the need for us to be connected with people we care about, the people who care about us, and how we find those ways of being connected. And I think what would be nice maybe to look a bit of different types of loneliness, because in the data that I just shared, they spoke about chronic loneliness, and it might be some form of acute loneliness, but it might be some temporary loneliness because of maybe the phase we find ourselves in our lives, or the stage we enter, or different episodes of traumatic experience. But also we can explore some positive elements of loneliness, such as solitude, when I choose to disconnect myself because I'll be going through a heavy period, or personally I'm not, but I know people who are introverted, and it's like, I need time just to be alone because I choose to be disconnected, because how I recharge my energy, my emotions, I'm able to process them that way, when, for example, I'm more extroverted. So I need a group to be able to process that. And loneliness might affect me differently, for example, again, than somebody who's more introverted. But you're the expert, so let's hear your thoughts on that.
Well, on that particularly, I would say definitely solitude. Human beings need time to reflect. We get such a lot of information in, don't we? One of the most important things as far as guiding ourselves through life and making decisions is that we're able to connect internally, know what we're experiencing, feeling from one moment to the next, know what we're thinking. Is life working for us? Is this relationship working? Do I enjoy what I do? If not, how am I going to change that? And we do that very importantly in relationship with other people. At times we need other people, and also some people are always having to go to other people because they might struggle to their time alone becomes so difficult for them. And that takes me to, when I talked about connection, it's not just connection with others that we're looking at here, which is often the context of loneliness, about having other people in our lives. One of the most important ways in which we need to be connected is to ourselves. And if we're not, if, for example, we're in that sort of fear and anger side consistently, we always need to be in it a bit. But if that's what dominates our lives, being alone and being problem focused on ourselves, for example, that kind of perhaps in the work context, imposter syndrome or criticizing ourselves, we're not able to spend that time alone in a way that supports and nurtures us. What happens is we're criticizing ourselves or thinking that we're losers or failures. I think solitude is only enjoyable, and it's such an important thing to be able to enjoy if we're connected to ourselves and have good sense of worth and value. If we notice what we're thinking all the time, if we're able to manage our fear, able to manage our anger and make it work for us, able to manage our comparisons and competition internally and make it work for us. And I think for a lot of people, time alone, they will totally avoid it because it's so distressing for them, because there's an internal critic. They should be doing this. Why aren't they doing that? They haven't done as much as other people. All those kind of things will be going on. It's also happening when we're talking to other people, because that's another element too. We could be around 100 people, but if we have a very strong internal critic all the time thinking they don't like you, that facial expression, that person isn't into you, they'd rather be here with somebody else. Again, it's a very lonely experience being around people. So one of the most important things that we need to look at in the context of loneliness is actually our internal world.
And exactly, the idea of solitude allows us to connect with ourselves. And because we're connected with ourselves, then we can, as you say, further connect to other people. And I think I like the point you mentioned, like I've experienced it myself. I can be in a crowd, like in London, you're at an event, you're surrounded by people. So definitely physically, I'm not lonely. But because I'm not connected with the group, or I might feel lonely because I feel, as you say, misunderstood, or I might feel like not liked, I could feel very, very lonely. So I think it's important to recognize that. I'm thinking as well, can we look a bit of the stigma, where the stigma comes from? Because nobody wants to be, I think, I've came across this funny term that I know it's been around for ages, but like billionaire mates, like nobody wants to be that kind of person where you're lonely. And why is that? Why are we afraid to be lonely? Even if we search for solitude, we maybe try to mask it as, oh, it's wellness time or me time. We just say, I just want to be by myself, which is absolutely fine, to be comfortable and confident to share that, especially as a man.
Definitely. I think we need that balance in life of solitude, as well as, of course, having good connected relationships with other people when we want and need them too. I mean, Billy No Mates, that was around. I don't know why I'm smiling, but those kind of things, we might talk about them in a kind of humorous way, but loner, those were the worst things that somebody could be called. And I think there's a few reasons for that. If you look at human beings, our primal need is to stay alive. And if we are out of the group, if we're excluded from the group, that is the ultimate fear. It's the ultimate survival risk, actually. We're stronger together. And I think you can see that manifesting in lots of ways, that people will compromise all kinds of values that they might have in order to stay part of a group. They might even feel lonely and disconnected within the group, but as long as they're part of it and not sort of being targeted or excluded, people will compromise all kinds of things. They will bystand where people are being bullied, or just sit around in groups where they're not really interested in what anybody's saying, or the values are different, just so as not to be excluded from the group. So I think in some ways to be alone is a survival risk for human beings. So there's a very primal evolutionary force and pressure not to be, and for that to be a bad thing and an insult. Equally, that part that's about the drives and competition and winning and acquiring more resources, more stuff, more status, more money, it needs other people. Again, from the point of view of that drive and need for human beings, we need to be around, we need others. And of course, the need for connection and love needs others too. So there are lots of reasons why I think human beings look on that as something that's problematic. And of course, to be isolated is consistent with not having great mental health and well-being, emotional well-being. I mean, I think being able to be alone with ourselves and for that to be a good experience is absolutely an indicator of very good mental health. So it's not a matter of having to be around people all the time. One of the greatest indicators, I think, of somebody being in good mental health and having good well-being is they can be alone and enjoy it. Well, it can be a sort of a time where they, as I say, reflect. Because if we're looking at other people, a lot of the time, what people are worrying about in terms of loneliness would be, does that person like me? Do these people like me? Not many of us are thinking, do I like that person? Is this someone I want to be around? Do I feel good in this group? Do I feel good with these types of people? Do their values align with mine? And that part all requires reflection on self, knowing what I feel. at any given moment, what my emotions are, what my values are. And that all requires, we can do that with other people, but it requires a lot of self-reflection, perhaps with a therapist as well. We can do it with others, but it does also require a lot of self-reflection.
Again, I think what stood out to me, like that benchmark of mental robustness, or just being connected with ourselves, being able to stay by, spend time by ourselves. It's really important to reflect, self-reflect, also to choose to do the hard work, as you say, again, by reading or going for a walk or in a company of a therapist. And I'm aware that not everybody, especially with the cost of living crisis, might be able to afford that. But I think still there are different ways we can find ways, even with a good friend, to be intentional about that. But one self-reflection, I think it can vary across cultures, across views. But being perceived as being lonely it might not be attractive because, oh, who wants to be with somebody who's boring, or because spend time by yourself, you're not a good company, not a great charismatic personality. And we want to avoid to be perceived like that, again, because of the risk of being excluded from the community, from the group. And therefore we, as you said, compromise our values, as it happens a lot of times with men, when we allow, even if you don't believe in sexy jokes or don't support them, but we just, in a workplace, when if somebody more senior than us in the hierarchy of the company says something, you're not going to say anything because you know that, well, I don't want to be at risk of X person saying something, or having something on my HR record, for example, or our mates, again, because how we perceive, we want to be part of the group, be liked, and stay together, because, as you say, this is how we learned as a species to survive.
Yeah, we're stronger together. And also that's the sort of stick that if we're out of the group, it hurts. It's, one of the main ways that people can punish people they don't like is to exclude them from something, not invite them. We know that that's one of the most distressing things we can do to another human being. Is if there was a group of 8 people, we just won't invite them or that couple. We know what that impact has on people. And that's the stick, isn't it? Why we need to
rejection,
be around
basically.
There's also as well, we need to be around people because we get all that wonderful validation from them and all the ideas we learn. And so that's the kind of carrot of being in relationship with other people too. And I think those are both elements that human beings are always carrying at the same time.
Absolutely. Now I'm thinking we could maybe look a bit more into what are the drivers behind what would make men a bit more lonely. And I came across a bit of an old piece of statistic, which I think gives a bit more contrasting view to what I shared earlier from the ONS data, which is the Joe Cox Commission on Loneliness. And in 2017, so this is pre-pandemic levels, pre-pandemic time, where it showed that 8 million men of all ages in the UK felt lonely at least once a week. So this is not chronic loneliness, it's just they felt lonely once a week.
Okay.
But nearly 3 million reported that it happened on a daily basis. But 1 in 10 men said they would not admit to feeling lonely. So this is the issue where maybe women, is the reporting issue, that women are more lonely, not because they actually are, but probably because they are more vulnerable, probably more brave to admit, like, look, actually I'm lonely. When we probably, to some of the reasons we just covered earlier around stigma and fear, we hold behind of reporting that. So this is some of my interpretation. What are some differences between the ONS data and the Joe Cox Commission of Loneliness? But keen to hear your thoughts and the drivers, but also maybe on the data that I just shared.
Sure. As far as kind of disconnectors, if you're looking at the things that disconnect, more survival parts, so fear and anger, we need them in life, but they're about survival. They are disconnecting. And as I said, the drives, the more stuff, more status, more money. Those two, if you look at men may say this to me now still, that they see their role in life as provide and protect. If in the basic order of needs, protect, which is to stay alive, and to provide, to bring money, both of those things, because protection, you need fear and you need anger. If they're chronic, they're chronically disconnecting. And also to provide, you need to be always needing more, wanting more. If you have a certain amount of money, you will need more money. If you get a promotion, you'll probably need another one. It's always about working ourselves out in relation to others. Well, that person's got more, that person got a job promotion, why didn't I? Yeah, and so both of those I think are disconnecting actually in many ways, but they have fundamentally been what men have expected of themselves. I know this is very stereotypical, traditional, more stereotypical way of looking at it possibly, and there's no all across with everybody, but there are themes, I think. And one of those themes might be that men are very comfortable, well, I say comfortable, but they're very familiar with that provide and protect. You know, where sort of happiness, sustaining happiness comes is connection. And often connection is not as necessary for providing and protecting. I mean, you need to be nice to people in order to get a promotion, but it isn't of itself something that often dominates for men. And I think that can be the difficulty. Men occupy those parts of themselves which can often be disconnecting. And if you look at the types of things that men will do as well, and I know this is really generalizing, a lot of things that men do might revolve around sports or so competition and going out cycling and being faster and being quicker than perhaps their friend or quicker than they were before. And you can see that from the provide side of things, you know, why that's important. Drive, it's a great thing to have in life to push us through life. But it's a man's emotional world, his fear, his sadness, his anger, that's more in that place of connection, somebody expressing their emotional world. So I think there's also something about where we are meant to be connecting. So friendships, they're often in competitive environments. And again, I'm not in any way diminishing the importance of competitive environments for people and competition, but I don't think they are as connected, purely connected on a sort of deep emotional level. And or not all relationships are going to be like that, but I think we need some, and some men lack any. As I say, they're going to be around people, but they're going to, you know, if you look at, say, football, yes, of course, people feel connected to the person next to them because they are supporting the same team. But there's absolutely an element of it, which is othering a group over there, and we are better than them, and I will feel bad if we lose. And probably not a lot of it revolves around how I'm feeling or my emotional experience or reflecting on my life or my job or my relationship. So yeah, I can really see how men get into those situations, even of spending a lot of time around other men. We're sort of making each other laugh, competing. You know, another element of this, I think, is banter, which is around, of course, for all people, well, lots of people at the moment, but can particularly characterize male relationships. And I think it can be being used at times to express anger. It can be used to diminish people, to make some people more powerful in a group, to put somebody else down, to control. What I'm saying is it's group behavior, but it's not necessarily very connecting. So these are all important things to look at, I think, you know, from our thoughts, feeling, body, behavior, even when we're around people, is what we're doing connecting?
Great insight about like what drives us in terms of like the element of competition and how we try to achieve certain things. And fun enough, I was reading a book on loneliness, and they were kind of describing the idea of, like you say, this kind of, I'll put it quite bluntly, but the selfish need for, like myself, like, you know, to win against the other team, or you know, our community, our group to win, and so on. So the book was saying that a lot of times we see ourselves as as described it, the homos economicus, like that we always kind of, we are rational, but in a selfish way, always make the rational decision that will give me more advantage, more benefits, more financial, financial income, for example. But they're also giving that this is still a very, on the paper, very sterile perspective of how we are as humans, because a lot of times we can also have the capacity to, you know, why do we give to charity? Why do we just give money away? Where you show that we can also think beyond ourselves, as you say, to connect to other causes, right? Like absolutely. Give to a cause that I don't benefit. I obviously have to trust that they will use the money how I would like, how I wish they, or at least how they say they're going to use it.
Those are very connecting qualities. Trust of others. Going to a stranger, so I don't even know who it's going.
Exactly.
Well, I might know a general theme, but that is saying, again, I feel connected to another human being who I don't even know. And I think the difficulty, again, it's not criticizing anything, but around competition and teams, is somebody is always othered. That place of connection, which it was never going to be part of life all the time, but I think we need more of it, not to feel lonely, is much more that place of I have lots in common with a stranger because they're human, and therefore they get annoyed about things and have had their heart broken and they feel lonely sometimes. There isn't a kind of this with anyone. That place of connection much more is an empathy, which again, charitable work, selfless acts are often based on empathy for others too. They're all connecting qualities. And I think that there's another thing about loneliness as well, is it's not just not being around people, it's being able to talk about the things that are important to you. And some of those things for people are fun stuff, and competition and winning are important, but also what's very important to talk to other people about is our emotional experience of the world. No more important than anything else. It just tends to be one that gets pushed down, particularly for men, because our sadness, our fear, if you look at protection and provide, they're often, they might be seen as somehow weakness and interpreted as weakness. To feel sad or frightened is contrary to being able to protect. So it's in conflict. If I want to push myself forward and drive through, like, generally I have to have a lot of self-confidence and belief in myself. To be frightened, again, is not consistent with winning often. So you can see why for men, but for people generally, I think those more, that full range of human emotion is somehow not, certain ones are not talked about. And I think that's where also it's not again just about being around people, it's being able to talk about the things that are really top for us. And I do think that can be more difficult for men than it is for women.
Yeah, speaking about the kind of the topic we're covering in this moment about drivers, and sometimes loneliness can be because of the types of jobs we are having or we're doing. I'm thinking with my social science kind of hat, is because of the environments we find ourselves, either urban or more outdoors, in terms of more rural. They can also have factors that can contribute to our loneliness. How willing are we to travel, to meet our friends, or where the proximity to our neighbors or our families as well. And I'm thinking as well, we talked about earlier about age as well. I'm thinking, like, as men especially enter their 30s and 40s and midlives, where they have established circles of friends, like families and so on, can in a way shrink their, I can speak also for myself. I've seen how my circle of friends has started to shrink in many ways, and I have to be more intentional in reaching and building those friendships. But also, to your point about vulnerability, I agree that although it's a stereotype, but it's true, it's a cliche, but we tend to be less vulnerable with each other, especially with other men. And I think at the same time, while this cliche is true, I also think it's false, because it's not like women have a greater capacity for being vulnerable. I think men equally have the same capacity to be vulnerable as a group, but because the way we've been socialized and the kind of concepts of what masculinity means we have been exposed to, we tend to, from usually, I think, at least different data depends on the country, but when we're like pre-teenage years, or like between 11 and 13 years old, we are vulnerable. We're looking for those kind of deep friendships. But as we enter teenage years, and then moving in towards college and university years, then we start to be more that bravado, because maybe we're trying to appeal to a certain type of masculinity, maybe to attract a partner or status and so on. So I think we can maybe think about, like, how we as men can we try to deconstruct that idea of vulnerability is weakness, because it happened, as you say, because of banter. We know the risk of that social punishment that we can have if we are the brunt of banter from our mates, or if we exclude it because we try to kind of how do you say, pull our head above the parapet and say, like, oh mate, this is sexist, don't make that joke, or that's racist, or whatever. And then we know that the pushback is quite strong, and sometimes we just bite our tongue. So how do we navigate that tension as men
and women? I know there is this men are from Venus, women are from Mars. I can't know if it's that way around. I actually think, I work with people all the time. Of course, there are personality type that's coming to therapy, whatever that might mean, but a range of people from, I only work with 18 and above, but up to 88, and across, I would identify gender-wise across the spectrum, sexuality-wise, all human beings want to be seen and heard. All human beings want their emotional experience to be recognised. All human beings generally respond well to that happening. So men's need to bring their fear into relationship, and their sadness and their joy and their love, because I think that's the other thing as well, isn't it? What, of course, somebody might get bantered to for saying they're fearful about something. They will also, if they're told they love something, love, excitement, joy can also be controlled and put down. It's not just those parts. To say somebody loves somebody is a vulnerability to a degree, isn't it? So I would say, from a starting point, it benefits all people. It feels good for all people to be able to do it with people that we trust. But it is choosing who to trust.
That's a very good.
Yeah.
So just to say, that's a very key point that I like that you made. Like, that so I always say it's important for us to open up as men, in general, as people, to people we trust and we choose to trust. So yeah, that's the only kind of point I just wanted to underline that I think is really important.
Absolutely, because where choose to trust came from for me was there's a treatment for trauma which is called EMDR. It doesn't really matter what you may know, but it doesn't really matter what it stands for necessarily. But one of the things they do is they start, because of a traumatic incident, they look at how it's changed your beliefs. If you look at the negative belief, I don't really like the words positive and negative, but the negative belief for a lot of people in a traumatic event is I can't trust anyone. And then you have a preferred belief. And what you might say is I can trust everyone, but actually they're very careful to say that it's I can choose who to trust, because not everybody is going to be trustworthy. Not everybody is going to be receiving your sadness and your fear and honouring it, or your love in the way we would like, or it deserves, I suppose. So there's definitely something about choosing, well, as we've said, a kind of safe environment to do that. Perhaps more on a one-to-one basis can help, but there are certainly, that increases connection, emotional intimacy, male or female or non-binary, whatever somebody would identify. So, we can often tell the people in the group who would be more open to it, I think, and the people that probably wouldn't. When I'm talking about being more connected to people, the thing about loneliness is people think, I need to bring lots more people into my life. How do I meet more people? I do think it's really worth bearing in mind that it's not just about more or quantity. We can deepen relationships, even if we've known somebody for 20 years and they've been a particular way, the relationship. It may only be because somebody's never said they felt sad or frightened or expressed love, or that it hasn't been okay. Do you see what I mean? We avoid things and think, well, nobody's going to like that, or that person won't respond well if I am vulnerable. But actually, when somebody is, it goes very well. I think there's having the courage to do it, but I think we often know who it's going to be that's much more likely to receive that in the way that it needs to be. Just to finish off as well, just as a little side thing, you mentioned urban environments and connection. If we're looking at connection, there are some people very much get their connection need met through pets or animals. It's not just other human beings if you're looking at countering loneliness as well. It's about connection, isn't it? And that it's just about that feeling within you, and that can come from a podcast. You don't even have to meet somebody. A lot of people have kind of parasocial relationships with whoever they see on podcasts or YouTube channels or television or musicians. So I think all those things can reduce loneliness. But the urban environment thing, I was just thinking, lots of people, but not much nature. And I was going to say that as well, is I think a lot of people feel more connected to themselves than others in more natural environments. Again, even if they're alone, they'll somehow feel connected, because they're part of nature. And I think that's something that can be quite unhelpful when I see enormous blocks being put up one after another with not much opportunity to connect with nature. I think that somehow, somewhere, that's sort of aggravating that disconnection and loneliness in people, I think, despite being in a building with 500 other people.
Very interesting point. And I love that, because I think one point that in the book that I mentioned earlier that I read on loneliness is about, for example, they were saying it's important to spend quality time, solitude time in nature, not just, among an urban landscape full of, an urban jungle where just blocks all over the place, shopping centers and so on.
Yeah.
But also saying that the best is if you exercise in nature. For example, if you go for a run, or for a walk about let's say half an hour to an hour in nature, has the best benefits to counteract loneliness, even if you're lonely, but because you're in nature, takes your focus off yourself, makes you reflect on the world or any social issues that might be happening in the world, and takes the focus on like me, or I'm stressed, or I'm lonely. So it helps you to, or just as you say, to connect to yourself, like some of the issues that I'm experiencing or exploring at the moment, what can I do about it? So it allows us to be able to filter and go through that. But also linking to pets, I remember I used to have two small dogs when I was a student.
Yeah.
When I was living back home in Romania, and one of them was really kind of more friendly, more outgoing, and she wanted to spend a lot of time with us as a family. And when the other one, the older one, was the mother, she was like, she was very solitary, like she liked to spend time by herself. But the younger dog, she was very funny. I remember once I was studying for an exam and I was in my room, and she just came in the room, she jumped on me and just literally sat on my lap. She just wanted presence. She didn't want me to kind of cuddle her or whatever. For her was enough just to sit on my lap, and I was reading for my exam, and I just realized she just wanted companionship. And it was just also because I was at home, I was studying a lot for my exams. I was also for myself. So it just was a nice moment of connection for me that stays with me.
Totally. I'm a member of a gym, and normally you go through and flash a membership card and you get a nice smile from whoever's behind the desk to say hi, because they know me. I go there a few times a week. So the big smile, we smile at each other, and it's a moment, isn't it? But it's a moment of connection. And then a couple of weeks ago, they said, oh, you need to tap your card now because we want to know who's coming in and out, just for statistics and numbers, who's using the pool and the gym. And of course now, therefore, I walk past that desk and I tap my card to get in. And I know that's more efficient from the point of view of the club, knowing who's going in and out. But what I've lost is, I know it's a few seconds, but of connection with somebody that I knew. And I think that's also something about the world. You can see it in lots of different ways. I see older people, and I know this is a real generalization, but a lot of older people might talk about loneliness, and they might have not have had many social interactions that day, and that was one of them. And now they get told to tap that and go through. I was just thinking more generally. You go into supermarkets, you go to a self-checkout, so there isn't that contact with other people, and I can just see lots of different ways where things are being taken away as far as human connection, face-to-face, eye-to-eye, or voice contact. I just think generally it's ignoring the fact that human beings, like other human beings, and like to look into other people's eyes and just even to say hello. So what I was thinking about that is it's also tiny moments, isn't it? It's not necessarily an ongoing, deep, intimate relationship we're talking about here that counts as loneliness. It's walking into a newsagent and somebody saying, hi, how you doing? Or smiling. That suddenly you feel connected. So there are lots of ways we can connect. And I think, unfortunately, world-wise, the way things are going, technology is an amazing thing and it enables connection too. But there are certainly things and the ways that it's being used, I think, which is greatly aggravating people's sense of loneliness and disconnection.
Interesting point about technology, because I was thinking as well that I'm totally for technology. And as you said, there has a lot of capability and potential for us to be more efficient, more connected, and allow us to, do and create more. However, we need to counter in the effect it can have on our capacity as human beings. And it's very interesting. It's a very extreme example, but about how technology can reduce our capacity for empathy. And empathy, I believe, is a key element for connection.
Absolutely.
So it was a case in, I think it was Taiwan some years ago, and was a guy who played for 5 days in a row, literally 5 days in a row, like not only the day night, without hydrating properly or eating. He collapsed, he died on the spot. But this wasn't at home. He was in a internet club. He was playing other social games, interactive games with other people in the club and probably internationally. The police came, the ambulance came to obviously to assess what happened. Literally nobody from the club, no other people were there. Oh my God, somebody just died behind us. Like, let's take a pause and, just show reverence, like, just acknowledge the moment that happened. People just continued playing while the police, ambulance came to investigate the fact that that person, she just collapsed on the floor and died there. So I think that obviously, again, it's an extreme example, but show that reduced capacity for empathy, that somebody literally just lost their life next to us, because we are so focused on what we're doing and so self-absorbed on
Exactly.
obviously the channel used by technology.
Yeah, and if you look at those parts of us as well, fear has no empathy. It doesn't need empathy. If anger, no empathy. That's the problem with it, isn't it? We need it to protect us and boundaries, but it has no empathy. And I think the winning, competing all the time, again, othering the other team, they're different to us. Again, empathy isn't a quality. Their empathy only sits in that place of connection. So I can see it's both a symptom and a cause, I think, of loneliness. If you're looking at ways to counter loneliness through really connected relationships with other people, we can't have a connected relationship with another person without empathy. Empathy is the ability to imagine what somebody else feels like, isn't it? So we can't have a connected we can laugh with them or intellectually connect and be interested in similar things, but a kind of a deep relationship, we do need empathy. What I was going to say as well, if people are gaming, again, everything in balance is great, isn't it? People have a lot of fun. They do also at times connect on environments with other people, don't they? But you can see that drive place is not about empathy or connection with other people. That's not its dominant thing. It's about winning or more. And so I just think, you can really see how there's very natural parts of human beings. We're not making anything bad. It's just we want things to be in balance. And I would say that I would want the dominant quality, if it can be, if we're not in unsafe physically environments and we have enough financially, that we spend most of our time in that place of connection. And if we do, a connection with self and also others, if we do, I'm not sure we'll ever feel lonely. But not that that's the aim, but it's a very rare occurrence for people and certainly wouldn't be chronic.
Yeah, and I think to your point about, for example, financial means, I think it's important to acknowledge that sometimes people of lower income sometimes tend to be more lonely, because in order to have certain experiences, especially, for example, in a place like London or other urban places around the world, or cities, you need to spend money to be able to connect, to facilitate that connection. And then if you want to have that regularity, then because of financial means, that might be kind of circumventing or preventing that. And another point about that I just want to touch upon briefly, but in terms of effects of loneliness and drivers, is especially for men, and I can imagine this is mainly in a heterosexual relationship, but I can imagine it can happen in a same-sex relationship as well. The idea of how there's a pressure on one partner, mostly in heterosexual relationships, is the pressures on women to maintain those relationships, and men just kind of almost, I would say, feel right the fact that when the partner introduces them to another couple, and then you became friends with the others, then you have to make an effort. Or at times, this is how kind of our world shrinks, and then we become more lonely, and then put again more pressure on our partner to soothe us and care for our emotions, because we don't go somewhere else as well. But just wanted to point that out as well.
I mean, I think it's really important because they become the sort of gatekeeper for emotional connection, don't they? And that is risky territory. That leaves somebody unsafe. And it also means, in order to connect, that you can develop empathy. We can develop empathy. It's a skill, isn't it? Love is an emotional skill, in whether that's patience or empathy or boundaries or communication, all those things. And I think the difficulty, and I know you're not being as binary as this in some ways, but leaving it to someone else primarily, is we can absolutely do those things as well as anybody else, and it's as important for us to do it as anybody else. So but if somebody else is doing it, we won't learn it either. And I think that's, and again, I don't mean that in any patronizing way, I just would say that about everything that we do is learned. It's a really interesting point about couples, how within couples, and we can become more extreme versions of ourselves because we just give up needing to do it because they do, and we're just not practicing those skills. And I do think that leaves somebody, we are conscious of that, we'll know that on some level, that is
there's also,
yeah.
So there's also the risk, if the relationship breaks down, or let's say the
Completely.
partner passes away, then literally, as you say, we not only that we left without the friends, but also without the skill of
Absolutely.
building or maintaining a relationship.
Absolutely.
And just on kind of look at some positive aspects of in terms of how loneliness can affect men, their relationship with their mental health, because I believe at times we're more vulnerable because we lack that intimacy, that community and interaction with others. that can affect, we're more prone to be vulnerable to probably a depression or anxiety. And I know that it's a vicious circle, that because we have a mental health issue, then we tend to either, because of it, we tend to be more prone to be in a community.
Yeah.
And so it's that kind of spillover effect. But
Yeah.
I would like to highlight the positive benefits of actually being in a community, because having, you know, mates, pals, how I like to call them, bros, it lowers our blood pressure and trigger positive chemicals in our brain that gives a better and stronger immunity. We have strong people with strong social networks, are less stressed, more resilient, more optimistic, and we're also more likely to be in a healthy, you know, literally weight, and have a healthy weight, less likely to suffer cognitive decline, and we can enjoy some high protection from cancer, heart disease, and depression. So this is how it can affect being community, brings this strength and support for our body that probably we can't get anywhere else. And obviously the negative effects on all these aspects of our lives are because we are more lonely, we are more stressed because we're lonely, or if we, you know, God forbid, we tend to have a chronic illness, it's much harder to look after ourselves than if we have our partner. And again, that doesn't mean that we have to fall on the partner, because we can also take that support to our partner as well, because if they become ill, we'll be there for them as well. But I think it's important to see why it's so important for us to be part of a community, as you say, not only to be part of it because we belong, but how it affects us personally in our bodies, our minds, and as well.
It's really important, isn't it, to hold on to the carrot, the benefit of being around other people as well. And as you say, it's, you know, that psychological state of connection with self and others is where people feel whole, or their environment, or their pets, or whatever it is, or their job, is where people feel whole and where they have meaning and purpose. Most often, you know, if you're looking at people who are dying, I wrote about it in my book, actually, most people that are dying who preoccupy about saying thank you, please forgive me, I forgive you, and gratitude. Oh no, so telling people they love them. All those qualities, all those words are connection. They're not worried about how much money they earn or whatever it might be. It's all about relationship. So there's clearly something about people and if I ask people often as well, because I might do that in therapy, what's their most important value, what's most important to them, generally people will always say other people, their families, so we know that is where a meaning and purpose and feeling good about ourselves and the world sits, in good relationships. And again, I think it's important to say people we can trust, of course, and not everybody's trustworthy in life, but the benefits that come with that, absolutely, it's good mental health, and that means good physical health, and good physical health means good mental health. So those two go up and down with each other. You know, we learn new things from other people, we find out things we didn't know, we get validation from other people. You know, it's a great quality and skill that some people have, is to reflect back other people's worth and value. It's not always about solutions or advice, is it? It's just sharing our experience with another human being, again, who is trustworthy in that way. It just makes people feel good. It regulates people. Had to have co-regulating relationships where talking about this to this person makes me feel good and makes you feel good is an amazing thing for human beings. I just did a video on my channel about should I become a therapist? And one of the things that I heard somebody say, I hear these things, I can't remember who said them, but is good relationships are life's best experiences. And I think that's really true for a lot of people. Our difficulty is, which I've said, I think there's a lot of inborn fear, anger, competition, comparisons, which unfortunately count against that or contradict having good relationships at times. You know, we're not. There are lots of things that human beings experience that conflict with it, unfortunately. But fundamentally, you know, we all know the feeling of being, hopefully, of being in a group of people where we have values shared, we're having fun, we feel heard, listened to, seen. There aren't many better experiences for human beings. I think, you know, if you say to most people, again, that's all a bit morbid, isn't it? But if you had 3 months to live or 6 months to live, what would you do? Most people would say they spend time around other people, whoever was important to them. And I think that all attests to the benefits of being around other people that human beings know are there. Unfortunately, there's a lot of our biology, trauma equally, most people's trauma is relationship trauma. They've got they disconnect, their fight, flight, freeze because of things that happen to them in early experience. So at the hands of someone else or other people, and I think that can be the problem, is they then carry that experience on through life. So a good healing relationship with other people where we feel seen and heard, whether you're a man, a woman, non-binary, whoever, is most people's experience of happiness, actually.
I think to your point about for example, morbidity, like that kind of still kind of quite strong, but still I think relevant test of like, if you have 3 months to live, what is helpful with that is channels the mind, it focuses on what actually is important, you prioritize, like you realize that a lot of things that, let's say, financial material gains kind of start to fade away, and kind of very much links to Maslow's pyramid of like, that security. Absolutely. It's important to have it at the base. Then as we go higher up on the pyramid, then we realize that the experiences, the relationships are the top priority that gives us fulfillment. Not obviously we need the a good house, a good job and so on, but that will not give us the fulfillment and the experiences we need to connect, to be connected. And also to your point of morbidity, when we are on that final hour, we reflect on relationships. We don't reflect on like, oh, I would have liked again, just to be facetious, like, oh, my football team should be winning more, and I'm so annoyed that they didn't, or stuff like that, or I should have make sure that get extra bonus. Obviously, probably again, with the focus on, they would have loved me probably a bit more money to support my family and so on. But again, the focus is not
and I am glad you're making that point as well. Actually, in the video that I'm talking about, I did talk about self-actualization, and Maslow, I just mentioned it in there because I do realize that we do need, if somebody's in a risky situation, a life or death situation, that is the need that needs to be taken care of, isn't it? We can't connect, or if we're dead. So that sort of physical safety, those things, psychological safety, as far as dangerous environments in that way as well. Of course, there are people that are in those situations, and that this isn't necessarily that territory. Is equally, if people can't afford to live and don't know where their next meal's coming from, clearly that's the need appropriately that they'll be dealing with, and that is going to dominate and preoccupy them. Shelter, food, heat, those kind of things. But I think the difficulty with the money from that point of view is that part doesn't know what's enough necessarily. So what most human beings would say they need is enough money, and there is a particular amount, isn't there, where people's happiness, when they get over and above it, doesn't really increase very much.
Spot on.
Because I think because what we don't want is wealth versus health, mental health, and I think human beings have a natural tendency to do that that part doesn't know when's enough, and it won't, so it will go on and want more, and at the expense of our connected relationships with other people, because we can only do one thing at a time. And if what we're doing is working because we haven't got a clear idea in our mind of what is enough financially, we probably are sacrificing relationships to some degree. As I say, we can only do one thing at a time. But I'm glad you say the point about there are plenty of people who can't spend all their time in connection.
And I think also it's just a few other reflections. First is that to our listeners, that I'll put a link in the bio with your YouTube channel, but also your book, because I think they're really important, great resources for them. But also to your point about community, that also a realization that I had during the pandemic, that community is the place where we also, as you say, get the most fulfillment, but also the place where we get unfortunately, our traumas, our hurt. And then the fear, the risk that comes with, oh, I've experienced some traumatic experiences in the community or in relationships, therefore I should avoid them. Or again, the issue of trust. Do I trust that being part of, of this community or in this type of relationship will not harm me? Again, in our brain is like, oh, this is danger. And it's although sometimes it might look like danger, but it's not danger because of the fear of not being hurt again, or being our ego, our emotions being hurt. We kind of hold back. And that's why I think the challenge of being vulnerable, that trying to, as I choose to trust that, even if I'm a bit afraid now, but I choose to give this person the benefit of doubt that they actually have good intentions, although they might look a bit, unsure, sketchy from the outside.
Yeah, completely. There is, as we say, that choosing who to trust. Maybe, but at times we might get. There is another Instagram thing, which is something about sometimes people might betray us, but often it will bring out the best in themselves and us as well if we trust other people. So I just think it's important to keep going. As you say, the role of trauma in getting people to overprotect themselves, unfortunately, and the more we overprotect ourselves and keep ourselves out of relationship, the more anxious we feel, and therefore the more fear in imagination and the more monsters under the bed and ghosts in the wardrobe and that people imagine, unfortunately. So I think that thing about trusting, and it's not just about trusting ourselves to bring ourselves physically into relationship with another person. Again, there is that there'll be a lot of people that are self-editing. I can't say that, I'm not going to say that. They learn through traumatic experiences to keep themselves out. They're physically present, but they're keeping important parts of themselves out of relationship. It's just not worth the risk of humiliation or to be criticized or that somebody's going to use it against me in the future. So I think that's a very important side of things as well. I know that a lot of people, as we all will be sitting around 5 other people thinking, oh, I'd like to say this, but I'm not going to say that. And I think that's important to really notice as well, the extent to which we hold back on parts of ourselves too. Because intimacy, true intimacy, emotional intimacy would be to bring as much of ourselves into relationship with another person as we can and know that we're still loved. Because I think the trouble is, if people keep certain things back, they know this person likes them for what they show and what they present, but they don't know that they're loved for all of who they are. And I think that's really important for human beings to know as well. And again, back to choosing who to trust there. But I think human beings need that experience too. So it's not just, that we're around people. It's also what we're choosing to share as well is really key here.
Yes, and I think that's a great way, just a nice segue to wrap up the conversation in a positive way about like ways to find community. And I think the way you said, it's not only about quantity or just like spending time with people, because especially I think as men, and we are are in 30s or 40s or beyond, or even younger than that, how do you create those bonding experiences depending on our environments, like urban or more rural, or we are more extroverted or introverted, or we are part of different communities, LGBTQ, or different race and so on. So how do we do that? And it's really, really hard, especially for us men. And I think one kind of thought that I had around it, they say, for example, in I think it was the Journal of Social and Personal Relationships, a study published there, said that on average it takes 90 hours of time for someone before you consider them as a real friend. So 90 hours of spending time together.
Yeah.
In order to be close, you have to spend 200 hours together. But I think what is important for me is where we try to quantify, to measure, it's also about the quantity of those hours that we spend together. And also I think the frequency, like how often do we meet with that person? Because if we have 90 hours across 5 years, I think there will be a long time, like period to call somebody friend. But if we have those 90 hours frequently, but also doing qualitative kind of, as you say, bonding experiences, that would help. And my thought, like some things that we mentioned earlier, is like volunteering together with somebody, helping a friend. Yes, sports, it might help to a certain degree, as you say, with the risk of befriending others, but also if it's just a collegial fun, even you can also befriend the people on the other team eventually, hopefully. Others were suggesting even like group dance, like having a dance group together just gives the sense of purpose without having a competition like the other. With this group, we spend time dancing together, for example. But keen to hear your thoughts about what are some of the ways, especially as us men, we can find ways to bond with others and find those kind of meaningful connecting relationships.
Yeah, I mean, there are all sorts of different ways that human beings can connect with others, isn't there? And I think that's the great thing as well. Of course, we can learn things from other people, which is so important, reading books, podcasts, listening to things, and also always keeping an eye on that internal reflection of who is it when do I feel good? What kind of people am I around when I feel good? Do you see what I mean? Because one person's enjoyment can be different to another person's. I do a emotional needs inventory. If somebody's experiencing anxiety, I added a few, but that's actually in the book. But there's about 15 things, emotional needs. And in terms of others, feeling part of a wider community is one of them. Do you feel part of a wider community? But the main ones about others is, do you have at least one close friend? And do you have an intimate relationship? So again, you might say not everybody's story is to have a sexually intimate relationship with somebody else. Some people get their emotional needs met in terms of connection through friendships and other things, but it isn't necessarily. It's certainly not a volume thing. What we're looking at is when and how do you feel connected, and with who, and go towards that. I remember somebody saying, I'm doing this a lot, I realise that, what's the best piece of life advice they were ever given? And this person said, go towards the warmth. And I think they're looking there about how, people remember us for how they feel around us, don't they? So I think the important thing here is that there are lots of ideas as to how to, doing activities with other people, for example, can be good. There's something called the Men's Shed. I did a podcast with Man Up, Man Down, and they were looking at something called the Men's Shed, which is where men get together and fix a lawnmower or something like that. So there are groups and things out there, lots of ideas in terms of meeting other people and new people. I remember also their idea was go to 3 local clubs that you're interested in, choose your 3 favourite people from each club, and then form a group separately outside of those people. Now that's a really good idea, theoretically, doesn't it? I think the act of, for some people who are feeling lonely, going into a new group and going over and talking to somebody and asking them afterwards whether they can have an ongoing friendship, that's all down to how you feel. Fear will make people, social anxiety will make people avoid that. So I would pay a lot of attention on in some ways, self-care and relationship with self and self-esteem. People feel much more connected to us when we're open and honest about who we are. And we clearly communicate and we know who we are. And so those things are as important, I think, as how we find others. But I don't think it's necessarily that we need 25 people. I just think human beings need to know fundamentally that all of them, if you look at intimacy, to show all of their thoughts and feelings, and it's all okay and it's all loved to another or a couple of other people. But yeah, it's not an easy thing to do, but it requires trust, as we've talked about, and courage to do that, and very much consciously noticing who we like, because I think that's really important as well. If you go for people, if you have particular interests, knowing what you enjoy as well, go to those sorts of interest groups as well, because there could be similar personality types. We don't want everybody to be exactly the same as us, of course not. Other people need to be different and interesting to us too. What I mean is difference is interesting to us, but we also want to be around people who we feel good around and have similar shared values. So I think that's important as well to bear in mind.
Excellent. I think I like the idea of the shared interest, shared values, because that helps us. That's by default creates a context where we can easily connect with those people, because in that affinity kind of facilitates a bit more higher trust, because this are our human bias. Then we kind of connect with people who are very similar to us, and that's why we tend to open up, and it helps. And I think what I also encourage, to remind people, in loneliness, is kind of try also. I also speak for myself as an extrovert. It's important to allow ourselves also to find kind of intentional times of loneliness or solitude.
Definitely.
So we can connect to ourselves as well.
Because how do we know who we are? Of course, we learn who we are in relationship with other people as well, but we'll get all sorts of things lobbed at us in relationships. You're this, you're that, or you're amazing, or you're selfish, or whatever it might be. We need to be able to discriminate internally and have a sense and a solid sense, and carry that around of who we are, because people like that as well. I think generally they like people who kind of know who they are, and as I say, we could do that in relationship with other people, but one of the main ways we do that is by checking in with ourselves and our own emotional experience. Definitely.
Yeah. And really great conversation, John Paul. I really loved, especially about loneliness, and drove into so many aspects of this multifaceted topic. But now I just want to wrap it up with two questions that I ask all my guests. And the first is, what stereotypes about men you dislike the most?
I guess mine would be around, it's probably more around that provide, protect, and connect. That I think that the stereotype that men are, just built to do those things and are unable to do the empathy and the caretaking and the selflessness that might sit much more in connection. That is a stereotype which I think there's something biological. There are elements that come from biology and physiology, but fundamentally, with 1 trillion neurons and 70 or 80,000 thoughts a day, for men's own benefit, we are absolutely equally able to any other gender to spend more of our time in that place of connection, and that is where we are happiest, I think, and we're just as capable of doing it as anyone. So I think that would be the stereotype. But we also have to realise, I think, that there are certain qualities that are required for connection which can conflict with those other needs. So there is some sacrifice that perhaps needs to be experienced about the reward and drives often for people, and that can be difficult. That can be really difficult.
Indeed. And I think also the challenge is that if we're so focused on protect and provide, that the question is, who's going to protect us as men, or myself as a man, and provide for me, not only financially but emotionally?
Absolutely.
Do I allow myself to be, if I'm in a moment of vulnerability, to be protected by my partner or my friends? So I think that's why it's important to deconstruct this idea. Yes, of course, it's important to look after your family, be a responsible person, first of all, for yourself and a partner if you're in a relationship. But that's not, as I like how you mentioned, that's not the ultimate goal for us as men. It's like we don't live in literally in forests or jungles as we used to do like long time ago. Obviously there is the idea of you need to have a job to be able to look after yourself because you need the income. But the imminent threat of a saber tiger, to jump from the tree, or from a bush now, it's not there anymore.
Exactly, and I don't think our brains have caught up, unfortunately. But definitely, our capacity. If you look at that thing that the greatest gift you can give a child, if people do have children, is a regulated nervous system. If you're looking at fear and anger, it is not a regulated nervous system. It's fear and it's a dysregulated nervous system. If you're looking at driving on and on and on, never enough, it's stress often for people. So. I definitely think that we men can perform that role with friends as well. Of course, it's not regulating other people, helping them to feel good, seeing, hearing, not always having to impose a frame on somebody or say that they know, or I think that's just men are just as able to do that as women, and get the most important thing, get as much reward from it as well. When we are in connection, we feel rewarded and we feel safe. So we can, and so it's as good for men as it is for anybody else. And as I say, it may not be often our experience of life up until that point, but we can certainly develop that, and it's to our benefit, and of course the people around us, that we do that.
Amazing. And last question is about actually the positive bits. Like, what are the attributes do you associate with a healthy view of masculinity? It doesn't have to be like this is the golden standard, but for yourself personally, what are the attributes you associate with a healthy view of masculinity?
Yeah, I suppose for me, if we're looking at the kind of concepts I've used, it would be balance. It would be to be able to protect ourselves and others, and let other people do that for us too. To provide enough for ourselves to be stimulated and challenged and have the drives through life, and also to spend a significant amount of our time in much more in that place of kind of meaning and purpose and connection. So it would be balance, I would say, rather than being dominated by the first two, which is often what happens. Very, very hypervigilant for protection, chronically annoyed, irritated, angry at whatever's going on, and then make up for it and help ourselves to feel better by winning, making sure these people win or I get more. And I think that's often how all human beings can often be dominated by those two. So I think it is much more having that energy, thought, feeling, behavioural energy in that place of connection with self and other people.
Really fantastic conversation, John Paul. Really loved it. Fascinating. Really fascinated by your insights, and thank you for all the great things you just shared today.
Oh, you're welcome. I really enjoyed it. Thank you.